Welcome, everybody, to the Department of Political Science at North Central College. My name is Bill Muck. I'm a professor of political science. I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Stephen Maynard Caliendo and Dr. Suzanne Chad. And we thought it might be fun to change the pace and not talk about global pandemics, not talk about coronavirus, and instead talk politics. So we're going to take a few minutes of your time and talk about the primary, talk about the general election. But before we do that, I'm going to have my colleagues briefly introduce themselves. Professor Caliendo, you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Stephen Maynard Caliendo. I'm Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Political Science at North Central.
Dr. Chad?
Yeah, hi, I'm Suzanne Chad. I'm an Associate Professor of Political Science and Coordinator of the Gender and Sexuality Studies program.
So we are going to start by talking about Bernie. Dr. Chad, so there's all the speculation about what Bernie's going to do. Is he going to suspend the campaign? Is he going to stick around all the way to the convention? What's your sense of what we're going to see and what all of it means for the primary?
Well, this is unprecedented times, and that's what everyone says right now is, oh, how many times can we say this is unprecedented times? But obviously it is, and for a couple of reasons, I think this is really interesting. So the fact that Bernie Sanders is staying in serves him well for two main reasons in this situation. One is that with one of the things that makes it hard for candidates to stay in the race, especially if their path is so narrow, is funding. And so now, because they can't crisscross the country, it doesn't cost as much money. If you can run a virtual campaign, you don't need as much money to stay in. So his incentive to drop out with not needing as much funding, really isn't an incentive for him to drop out. And what I will say, though, what I've noticed is as he's talked a little bit more as we've moved further along in the season, he did a late night show, I think it was last week, and his rhetoric is shifting a bit from my path is there, mathematically I have a path, to I need to stay in the race to continue to bring these issues to the forefront, to raise public consciousness. And in a time right now where the broken US healthcare system is right in the forefront, he really has a platform to continue to talk about his issues, even if that doesn't mean he's going to secure the nomination.
Stephen, what's your sense of it all?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with anything Dr. Chad said. I think that the finance thing is an interesting aspect of this. And of course, there's implications for the economy too. I mean, campaigns, for all we might bemoan how much money they spend, they create a lot of jobs. And the fact that the campaigning is going to be mostly virtual, at least for the next few months, and that includes, I'm not even talking about not having big rallies and flying around the country. I'm talking about door-to-door canvassing and things. I mean, people aren't going to be opening their door for strangers to hand them paraphernalia over the next few weeks or months. And so I think that's a good point. I also think there's other reasons for Bernie to stay in the race. I mean, the reasons to get out would be to help unify the party, but that's not his main goal. It never has been. He's not even a Democrat, right? And so he really wants to bring young people along. If he wants Donald Trump to be defeated, he wants to keep them excited, keep them engaged. There's some of them who are not going to vote for Joe Biden no matter what, but others who will. And I think that's an important part. It's only a 300 delegate gap at this point, which isn't a lot, except for the fact that the Democrats use proportional representation of the delegate selection. And so it's harder that even if Bernie were to catch fire for some strange reason, a scandal in the Biden campaign or something like that, it's not winner take all, so it's harder to make up a lot of ground quickly with the system the Democrats have in place.
One of the things I'm most curious about is how do Bernie supporters handle this, right? Falling in love with the primary candidate is kind of like falling in love in general, right? When you break up, it takes a long time. And if Bernie continues to stick around through the convention, are those supporters going to make the transition? And I think Bernie will do a better job this time than he did in 2016. I think he realizes the implications of it all. But I don't know about his supporters, and I wonder about that. It's not easy just to say, I'm in love with this guy, now I'm going to support this other individual. And I'm curious to see what role Bernie does in trying to push people in that direction.
Yeah, and unlike a lot of candidates, I mean, Bernie's been running for president for 5 years. And so these are folks many of whom have been with him for a long time and are very, very much committed to him. And so, I think we could get in trouble carrying your analogy too far, but it's a fair one. I think it's an interesting way to think about it.
Well, and if I could just add that in 2016, we talked about the Bernie or bust voters, the ones that just said, I'm not, the never Hillarys, I'm not going to vote at all. I'm just going to stay home. And the data shows so far that that's a much smaller proportion of Sanders supporters in this cycle than the last. And I think it's because of the push and the need and the want and the passion to defeat Trump. So for those who right now are sort of fervent Sanders supporters, even still, they're not never Bidens, if that's a new term we can use. And so the likelihood that they come out in ways that they didn't come out for Hillary Clinton, I think it's much more likely.
Okay.
And the relationship between Bernie and Biden seems better than the relationship between Hillary and Bernie, right? I mean, it just seems like the two of them have a better bond. And I don't know if that will make a difference or not, but it may keep some of the tensions down a bit.
Yeah, here's hoping.
Should we move on to our second topic?
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, I think one of the things, Bill, you said you wanted to talk about was the effect on the calendar of coronavirus, right? Is that where you're thinking?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I missed my cue. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry, audience. I missed my cue there. Yeah, so what we just broke today that the Democratic National Committee has pushed the Democratic National Convention from July to August. So signaling that they didn't feel like it would be ready to run in July. And so I guess the question is, we've seen states move their primaries in order to hopefully get people to vote in person. And then now the convention, at least the Democratic convention, is moved. So Stephen, what do you think might be the consequences of these moved primaries and possibly no convention?
Yeah, I don't know that there'll be a tremendous consequence to the presidential nominating contest, but I think, you know, what I'm worried about really, besides the public health aspects of a state like Wisconsin, continuing to hold in-person elections next week, when most states who are going in April and even in May have already gone to vote by mail and made a decision they're going to vote by mail only, is that the down ballot races. I mean, most of the states that are holding presidential nominating contests at this time of the calendar have all their nominating contests at this time of the calendar, the whole way down the ballot, Congress, and if they have a Senate race and a governor's race and their state local races. And so if voter turnout is low, that really impacts all those races as well. And so that's not good for democracy. And so that's a bit of a problem. It has sometimes been the case in the past that states who had early presidential nominations had a separate contest then for down, so the petitions didn't have to get in early or whatever. I don't think we had very much of that this year, and it's certainly by this time in the calendar, these states are having a full ballot, and so those are all going to be affected by these decisions.
You know, it's interesting. So we're talking about pushing back, which I think it makes a ton of sense to do that. But it's entirely possible that this is going to work its way through the entire summer, the coronavirus. I can't imagine what it would be like not to have a convention, right? I mean, both in terms of fundraising and the speeches and the energy, it strikes me that you have to do this in one way, shape, or form. And I don't know. I think it would give President Trump a big advantage to have, he's on TV all the time. We're seeing him. If the Democrat if Biden doesn't have an opportunity, it strikes me as a real advantage for the president.
Yeah, it's so always, I mean, the sitting president has an advantage in these elections, as you say. And I think while normally for maybe a less known candidate than Biden, not having that national stage to be sort of introduced, right, might be more challenging. I think for Biden, it might be a little less challenging just for the reason that he's so well known. He's been in politics for such a long time. The contentious nature between the candidates, I'm assuming it's Biden, of course, and Trump, there's such a big distinction between them and how contentious, of course, it is between the two of them, that there's stark differences. So for people who are like, I don't really know kind of which one I want to vote for, the convention isn't the thing that's going to drive them to one way or another. What I think is so interesting looking at not having a convention, right, is that the ratings for conventions are terrible. Primetime coverage has decreased over time. Nobody really watches them except for like us, right? Mm-hmm. And we hopefully our students do as well. And so it's not as much, the conventions are not as much about nominating as it is like the big party part of it. So not having that doesn't really affect the nominating process, but Bill, to your point of sort of mobilization, excitement, and fundraising, I think that's where we may see some effect.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. That we haven't had a second ballot in a presidential nominating convention in a very long time, but that's not the only business that takes place at national party conventions. And this is a time for ordinary citizens who are selected as delegates to show up and have a direct say in the future of the party, both in terms of platforming and in terms of all the meetings that are happening throughout the day, in the daytime when the general session isn't running. And there's a lot of important party business that gets done, and it only gets done every 4 years. And so not having those opportunities for networking and building a bench, right, helping to recruit candidates and having party leaders talk to potential candidates for Congress and the midterms and all the things that happen at a national party convention, all of that will be lost if we're not able to happen.
One more thing to think about too is that a lot of people say this election could come down to Wisconsin, and the Democratic convention is in Wisconsin. And if you can't have that, if you can't build some of the energy, what's that?
You wish. This is, I That's a homer call.
Don't knock Pennsylvania and Ohio. Come on now.
Right. So, but I do wonder, I mean, you know, Wisconsin
It's
was so close last time, and, you know, a convention like that could have a big impact, and both in terms of the economic impact for Wisconsin, but also politically. So there are just so many really, really interesting angles to all of that.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, the parties don't willy-nilly choose the cities where they're going to have these conventions. They're very strategic, and obviously Milwaukee was a choice for the Democrats for a very particular reason, so it's not good. And similarly, you know, North Carolina and Charlotte for the Republicans, because it was only, I think it was in 2012 that the Democrats had their convention in Charlotte, right? So Charlotte is, you know, North Carolina is seen as a place where that can be competitive, and a large minority population in Charlotte as well, and that's important for both parties in different ways. So yeah, it's a good point about the impact, the local impact of
Yeah.
One thing, if I could just add quickly, is that I've been thinking about, I don't know if the lineup was ever released about who was supposed to speak at the conventions each night. But that's sort of the springboard often for those with real political ambition in the party. We look at what it did for Obama in 2004, I think it was. We look at someone like Jason Crow in the Democratic Party from Colorado. And so there are people with politicians with political ambition that may not have that platform that they were hoping to have to springboard themselves. So that could have some consequences as well.
Yeah. Should we jump to our third topic?
Yes. What's the third topic? I don't remember. What we're going to talk about?
Virtual campaign. So the issue, so what happens? What happens if well, and I think if this is going to happen, if more and more of the campaign isn't in person, if we're not having rallies, we're not coming out, what is that going to look like? And you know, for me, this is really, really kind of a fascinating dynamic, because we've been moving that direction more and more. And again, you guys know this better than I, more and more campaigns are social media driven, but it's likely that this will be exceptionally virtual in terms of the campaigns and what that all means. And I'm struggling because I think about the way in which social media and our political system as a whole has moved into a post-truth world where campaigns use social media to shape their own reality, or, you know, in Trump's efforts are oftentimes to confuse reality. And we're just going to see more and more and more of this if it's online. So I'm really kind of fascinated to see how the campaigns shift and what direction they move in. So Suzanne, what's your sense of all this?
So what I've been focusing on a lot when thinking about this is some of the perceived or documented failures of the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016, and especially in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin. And it wasn't just her lack of physical presence, but it was also her lack of social media presence, and not only presence, but doing it in the right way to connect with the right people to get the money and also the mobilization. And so while we know that sort of the shoe leather campaigning has a highest return on investment, like being in the places and going to see the people gets you the votes, it's the most expensive. Well, they can't do that now. So whatever money they were going to throw into that, they're going to throw into these online campaigns. And thinking about Biden, those efforts need to be thrown into Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And if he can't do that successfully, and Trump continues to use the strategies that you were just discussing, it's going to make it even harder for those states to flip.
That's interesting. Stephen, what's your read?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of campaign spending toward the end is get out the vote efforts. And what does get out the vote efforts look in November? I mean, some of the experts are suggesting, even if we have an all clear in the summertime and we go back to normal, that the rebound could happen as early as November, even before Thanksgiving. You know, when it starts to get colder again, and so we may find ourselves in shelter-in-place orders or other guidelines to sort of not gather in large groups, and so that affects, you know, general election level rallies. And it affects, you know, people driving vans around the neighborhood, picking people up and taking them to the polling place, which, you know, in urban centers in particular is a pretty tried and true way to try to get out the vote for your candidate. So a lot of these things are going to be, you know, it may be that we have to vote mostly by mail in a general election, not just in the nominating contest. And, you know, what does that do to voter turnout, and what does it do to help or hinder the efforts of one of the other candidates?
And I think
down ballot, of course.
That's absolutely right. And I think to the point you just made there about how we vote is that's even contentious, right? So, you know, the idea that we move to all mail by vote, that's a big decision. And both parties are not going to be equally supportive of that. I mean, Republicans have expressed some concern over the last days even the president himself saying that if we move to an all vote by mail system, we're not going to see Republicans get elected, right? So I mean, this has a really big impact. So I wonder what the vote's going to look like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that typically, right, we think that we know that the demographics that turn out in smaller numbers are demographics that tend to favor Democrats. And so I think that's when President Trump goes on television and makes that comment about if we all vote by mail, Republicans won't get elected, that's what he's referring to. He's referring to those trends. And so, but voting is habitual too. And I don't know, it'll take some time for people to get used to voting by mail. I think lots of people who enjoyed walking down their block or driving around the corner and going to their local elementary school to cast a ballot may not be as excited to do it in the mail. And so that can affect voter turnout in a different way. So I think there's so many variables that we have to consider.
Yeah, if I could just add, I was thinking about this a little bit as well, because, depending on how long this goes and how much information we as the American public still need about about COVID, that if Trump continues to give these daily briefings or even takes them down to a couple every other day well into the election season, then that just increases the platform that a president already has to have a national or international audience at the drop of a hat. So that gives him significant advantage, even more than an incumbent president already has, to have that, whenever he wants it, audience. And while his poll numbers have gone up a little, and there's some explanation for why that's the case, just that access to the public, even if he doesn't necessarily use it in the best way, still gives him an advantage over Biden.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if that rally around the flag effect that he's seeing now continues. I mean, typically in times of war, Bill, you know this, right? I mean, you get it at the beginning, but if the war drags on for years, it doesn't maintain itself throughout the whole time. And that would be the case for an emergency like this as well. I think that there's definite concern about, the economy, which of course is very predictive of whether a president gets reelected for a second term. A strong economy. Certainly the president ought not be blamed for what's happening in this economy based on his economic policy. He may be able to be blamed for not reacting as quickly as he should have on the pandemic. But presidents shouldn't get credit for great economies either, and they certainly take it if they have the opportunity. So all those things put together make this very difficult to predict.
Absolutely. It makes me think a lot of the Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush election, where when the Iraq War started, George H.W. Bush's his numbers were just through the roof, and by the time the election rolled around, he was in a rough place. And so, yeah, we're seeing a rally around the effect with Trump right now. But how long can you sustain that? Especially with, the news sounds like it's going to get rougher and rougher as time goes by.
Yeah, and I think I'm sorry, Dr. Cuttrill, go ahead.
I was just going to add quickly that bounce that we usually see presidents get for the rally is a significant, like 20 to 30 to maybe 40 point increase. We're looking at 3 points for President Trump. That's it. So I've been looking at this a little bit about what this might look like. And if you look at the bounces that other countries' leaders are getting, it's much more significant. And so there are these mediating factors in the rally effect. Yes, it's a bounce, but it's 3 points. It's not 30 points. So.
Yeah. The other point I just wanted to make there is I think to Dr. Chad's point about access and the fact that the cameras are just focused on a time of crisis. The Trump campaign floated many weeks ago, even months ago, the idea that they may not participate in any debates during the general election this time. This would be an opportunity for the president to have some rationale for not doing that. I mean, you could just say, I don't want to do it. And I think there's, if I were his advisor, I think there's good reason for him not to do it, to be honest. I think it's politically strategic. I don't know that it's good for democracy to not have presidential debates. In fact, I don't think it is. But I understand why he would not want to. But in this case, he could say, look, we're still in the middle of a national event here, and I have to be the president, and that's the most important. And if I have to sacrifice myself politically to act presidential, of course, that would be a very strategic thing for him to do. And so, I worry very much about not having any presidential debates. I think we can have reasonable disagreements about the tangible value of them and whether they're really, in the spirit of the Lincoln Douglas format. They're mostly mini press conferences, but I think when there's only two candidates and it's a general election, it is an opportunity to really see the way people can lead and how they react to stress. And if we don't have a chance to see that with these candidates, I think it'll be a shame.
Absolutely.
That's a good place to wrap up. So let me thank my colleague, Dr. Stephen Caliendo and Dr. Suzanne Chad. This was a lot of fun. And on behalf of the Department of Political Science at North Central College, we tell everybody to be safe and stay at home. All right. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye, everybody.